At L&M Fine Jewelry, we hand select our diamonds to give you the very best prices possible. Monty knows a great deal when he finds one. Find your great deal at L&M Fine Jewelry.
Your diamond destination.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Samuel Akem here, and I'm back with another one. Thank you guys so much for tapping in. Week 3 just concluded in the Big Sky. Obviously, there were some really good games that were played this week. UC Davis versus Southern Utah went down to the wire. Weber State versus Lamar went down to the wire. Montana absolutely rolled Morehead State. Montana State was on a bye week. Portland State actually got their game canceled because of whooping cough. I hope all of those guys are okay. But we're going to be talking about the Big Sky. We're going to be talking about some of the changes going on in the Mountain West currently and how that could have ramifications for the FCS. So make sure you guys stay tuned in for the entire video. I appreciate you guys tapping in. Please hit the subscribe button right now. Please hit the like button right now. Leave me a comment down below. I appreciate you guys so much. Let's get straight into it. Okay, first things first. Montana absolutely rolled Morehead State. I think there were some things that were shown. A lot of people mentioned in this game that, you're probably not going to come away from this game with a ton of answers. But, after watching this game and after watching it back, I personally think there were some answers that were given about this Montana squad. First off, they dominated on the ground. Montana has an absolute stable of running backs. Eli Gilman as their number 1, Nick Osmo as their number 2, Stevie Rocker Jr. as their number 3, and quiet as kept, Malai Fanati as their number 4. I potentially think he could be the number 3 guy. I guess they're trying to save his red shirt, but I haven't seen him catch out of the backfield yet. I don't think he had any receptions yesterday, but 24 carries, 176 yards, a touchdown, average 7.5 yards, like 7.3 yards a carry. I mean, they completely leaned on this dude late in the third quarter and all through the fourth quarter, and he was a workhorse and he was running behind his shoulder pads, showing a lot of explosiveness. A lot of people who attended training camp a ton this summer for the Grizz mentioned this guy and said that he could be a player. And after seeing him yesterday, obviously, I know it was against Morehead State. I know. And I know at the point in the game where he was in, Morehead State probably had their backups in the game. I understand that, but this is Division I college football. And a lot of people will say, those are high school backups. Those are average high school players. There's a non-scholarship league, whatever you want to say. It's D1 football. They're playing D1 football just like Montana is. And when he got his opportunity to shine, you don't know how many times guys get an opportunity like that and don't make the most of it like Fanati did. I mean, it's a great problem to have for Coach Green. And I was talking to Coach Green after the practice or after the game, and I was like, man, it's a great problem that you have right now. Like 4 running backs that could all play, that could all be starters. I mean, that's a great problem to have. And, that is an amazing room. Coach Green has done a great job with those guys. I think that is going to be the strength. That could be the strength of this Montana team this year. Obviously, I think they leaned on the run game heavily last year. But this year, having the guys that they have in that room, if the offensive line can get things figured out, I think they could be really, really good. Now, the things that concern me about this Montana squad, there were still offensive line issues in pass protection against a Morehead State squad that is not very good. When you look at some of the issues they were having in pass protection, it could bring up a host of problems when they play against maybe a Western Carolina next week, or when they get into conference play, Eastern Washington, UC Davis. I mean, some of these squads that they're going to play, Montana State, that's going to create some problems with you because they're having problems communicating on the offensive line. They're having problems picking up blitzes. They're having problems even picking up 4-man rushes, and they're getting sacks because teams are getting sacks on them because of it. Another thing I want to mention, I talked about this in my breakdown, so if you want to go watch my breakdown, please go watch the breakdown, but also I want to bring it up now. I personally think, although, and this might sound crazy given that he threw an interception yesterday, I broke that interception down in my breakdown too, but I think Ayat should be the permanent starter. I don't think they should trade out. You look at some of the plays that Fife made, low, like throws that are low, throws that are not very accurate, throws that in more intense games could end up hurting you. And they had some special teams problems yesterday. They missed some field goal kicks. They had one that hit off the back of their line. So that's something to look at. But from the quarterback standpoint, they're running this 2 quarterback system. Ayat threw a pick and then they took him out. He didn't see the field until the middle of the third quarter. So, I think from that standpoint, it's going to hurt his confidence. I think he did come in and play fine when he did get back in the game, but the game was already settled by then. They did it last week where, he played most of the game, but they brought Fife in for a few drives. I think Ayat should be the permanent starter. I think whether he's playing good, whether he's playing bad, I think Montana should ride with him, and I think he should never come out of the game. I think he's a young guy right now, so let him make his mistakes, let him learn, let him improve as the season goes on, and let him be the permanent starter. That's what I think based off what I've seen. We have a healthy sample size of both quarterbacks at this point, probably a better sample size of Ayat, but, personally, I think that Fife is the guy based off what I've seen. I break it down a little bit more in my breakdown, and I would implore you guys to go watch that because I talk about a little bit more about what I didn't like about what I was seeing from Fife and why I would stick with Ayat. Now, the interception that Ayat threw was concerning. I think that was a good play by the cornerback, but definitely concerning when he had to check down to the running back in the flat. You guys can go watch the breakdown to listen to that. But Ayat and Fife, I would pick Ayat. The offensive line for me, offensively, is the biggest issue for the Grizz. Defensively, it's hard to tell, because Morehead State wasn't the best team. When they played against North Dakota wasn't really looking to throw the ball down the field, but I think from that standpoint, Montana did a decent job. I think in terms of penalties offensively or defensively, I think there was a pass interference on Ronald Jackson yesterday, but they had like 2 offsetting penalties as well yesterday. But I think pass interference is the biggest thing defensively. Tackling is the biggest thing. That's not an issue that showed up yesterday. Like I said, Morehead State's not that great, but tackling wasn't a huge problem for them yesterday. But offensively, the biggest problem they have is their offensive line. If they get their offensive line settled up, I think Montana will be a good squad. They have guys who are able to get open. They're scheming them up. Offensively, they're drawing the plays up, but you got to be able to get open. They have playmakers. You have to give your quarterback time to get it to those playmakers. Montana rolled them 59-2. Montana's going to get a really good test at home against Western Carolina this week. Western Carolina did not play the greatest game last week against Campbell. They bounced back this week against a ranked opponent in Elon and beat them. So that's going to be a really good game. They got a really good quarterback in Cole Gonzalez coming in here. They're going to want to get a win. Teams always come into Washington Grizzly and play their best. So Western Carolina is going to want to do that, come into Washington Grizzly and upset the Grizz at their home stadium. So that's going to be a great game to watch. Not so sure. I'm going to do my preview at the end of this video, so stay tuned. But we'll talk a little bit more about that game at the end of the video. But Montana versus Morehead State. Montana got the dub as expected. They were close to a 40-point favorite, and they won by 57. So let me know what you guys think about that in the comments, and I will move on. Okay, UC Davis played in a very, very close game against Southern Utah. It was a game that came down to the wire. I honestly thought Southern Utah had a chance to win this game. Their quarterback threw an interception at the end that kind of shut down their comeback attempts. But their quarterback, Miles Hastings, was 24 for 30, 266 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Lan Larison was the player of the game to me. 15 carries, 88 yards, no touchdowns. But he had 7 receptions, 92 yards, and a touchdown. 180 yards total offense. I'm still trying to figure out, this Southern Utah team is 1-2. Their one victory is an FBS opponent. I think their other loss is another FBS. Yeah, so they lost to Utah. They lost to UTEP. They lost to UC Davis. They beat UTEP. How good is UTEP? I think Southern Utah might be a decent team in the United Athletic Conference. UC Davis, I thought would be a pretty good team in the Big Sky as well. Last week in my poll, I had them at 4 in my Big Sky poll. I think actually 3. I think I had them at 3 in my Big Sky poll. I think this week I have them at 4 in my Big Sky poll. But UC Davis is a good team defensively. They kind of held Southern Utah in check in the second half. Southern Utah found a little bit of space in the second half to get to kind of near a comeback and maybe tie it up with the game on the line. But, they ended up throwing that interception. It was a terrible interception. I don't know where the quarterback was going with the ball. But, Southern Utah was able to do a couple of things. Bronson Barron, who came in the second half and really led that comeback, 7 for 15, 81 yards, 1 interception, that interception being at the end. Jackson Berry was 7 for 13, their starting quarterback, for 49 yards. They had a running back who ran for 150 yards on 24 carries, 2 touchdowns. So, UC Davis played a pretty decent, or Southern Utah played a pretty decent game. UC Davis was able to get the dub. UC Davis, obviously, I'm doing the preview at the end of this video, but UC Davis will have Utah Tech. So Utah Tech's just going through the Big Sky, getting beat up by everybody in the Big Sky. That should be a win for UC Davis. They should move to 3-1. But UC Davis is looking good right now. Land Larson is looking good. Their one loss is obviously to Cal. They beat Texas A&M Commerce. They beat Southern Utah. But one thing, I'm interested in seeing with UC Davis is when they play against some better Big Sky competition. They'll play Idaho in a couple of weeks. They'll play Portland State. They play Eastern Washington. They play Montana, Montana State, and Sac State to end the season. So UC Davis has a pretty decent schedule to end their season. To end the season. They have Idaho coming up in a couple of weeks, so that'll be a good test for Idaho, and that'll be a good test for UC Davis. But so far, I don't think too many teams have been tested, really. Montana is really one of the only Big Sky teams that has been tested so far, and they lost. They played North Dakota, who's one of the better Missouri Valley football conference teams. But UC Davis, you could say Southern Utah is a test because they did just beat UTEP. I think they're a good squad. They're a good outfit. So UC Davis was able to come out victorious. But I think I want to see them against some Big Sky competition to make a full assessment about them. But UC Davis is looking like a really good Big Sky squad. And they're bringing their lunch pail every week. So they're ready to play. I know they played Cal pretty strong when they played them. They ended up losing by 18, but it was a pretty closely contested game throughout. And then they ended up, yielding at the end. But UC Davis, a good squad. Be interested to see what kind of numbers they're able to put up on Utah Tech next week. But that was one of the better games that was played in the Big Sky Conference this week. There wasn't a lot of closely contested games in the Big Sky Conference. Idaho State got beat up by 30 points, by a little under 30 points by North Dakota. Albany got beat up by Idaho. Abilene Christian, they played a close game with Northern Colorado. They lost. Weber State lost a close one to Lamar. Just a lot of close games. Eastern Washington lost to Southeast Louisiana. A lot of close games, but the Big Sky was on the losing end of a lot of those close games. Northern Colorado, Weber State, Eastern Washington. Cal Poly won. Northern Arizona won against Utah Tech. Sacramento State won against Nicholls. But, an interesting week, to say the least, from the Big Sky Conference. So, you guys let me know what you think about that from the UC Davis standpoint of things. They got the dub by 3 points over Southern Utah, and we will move on. Okay. I originally wasn't going to talk about this game, but I don't know what to think about Weber State. I really don't. They lost by 30 to Washington. They played Portland State. They absolutely beat up on Portland State by 27. Was that 27? Yeah, they beat up on them by 27. And then they lose to Lamar. Now, Lamar plays in the Southland Conference. They are 2-1. They have one victory against Mississippi Valley. They got one victory against Weber State, and they lost by 7 to Texas State. So, I think Lamar could be a pretty decent team because, I don't know. Portland State's not that great. Weber State absolutely beat up on them. But, I don't think Weber State played a great game. I mean, their quarterback was 22 of 30 for 184 yards and a touchdown. Their running back, Damon Bankston, 83 rushing yards on 23 carries, so not great. Their leading receiver had 81 yards on 7 receptions. So, I mean, decent, Weber State threw an interception. They had an interception. They recovered a fumble as well, but I don't know, man. Very interesting from the Weber State standpoint of things. They lost by 1 point, a very devastating loss for them. They dropped to 1-2. I'm interested to see where they're gonna go. They play Northwestern State, who's 0-3, so I think they should win that this week. They have McNeese. That could be an interesting game. Clifton McDowell coming back to play a Big Sky team. But I don't know. I don't know what to think right now about Weber State. They play Montana in a few weeks on October 5th, so that could be a big date for Weber State. I would honestly say right now, based on what I've seen from both teams, Montana should win that game. But, who knows about Weber State? There's a lot of question marks. There's a lot of question marks in the Big Sky right now about a lot of these teams played. Like, it's so hard to judge a lot of these teams when they play non-conference competition because, I mean, when they lose, that doesn't give you a lot of information on how good that team will be in the Big Sky Conference. That just, Lamar could be a really good team. Weber State might not be that great, but then they beat up on Portland State. So that means Portland State really isn't that great. Not a lot of answers being given from a lot of these teams and a lot of these games being played. But, you guys let me know what you thought about that Weber State game, if you even saw it. I tapped into it a little bit. It was very slow developing. It was kind of hard to watch. It's kind of hard to watch some of these games going on sometimes, like Cal Poly Western Oregon. I did not turn that game on. Nicholls Sacramento State, I did not turn that game on. But then you look at Nicholls. So Lamar just beat Weber State. You look at Sac State and Nicholls. Nicholls won the Southland Conference last year. And I don't know where Lamar finished in that Southland Conference, but Nicholls went undefeated in that Southland Conference last year. They were like 6-5, but in conference they went undefeated. And now Nicholls is 0-3 this year. And granted, they've played FBS competition the first 2 weeks. They barely lost to La Tech, but then they play Sac State. So, Sac State's also another team that could be pretty decent in the Big Sky Conference. But how good is that Southland Conference? I think that's a big question. How good is that Southland Conference? Either way, you guys let me know what you thought about Weber State and Lamar, and I will move on. Okay, along talking of the Sac State and Nicholls, Sac State absolutely bludgeoned Nicholls 34-7. Sacramento State's starting quarterback, Caden, I don't know who the starter is now. I think Caden Bennett's the starter, but he was out during this game. I know he's been recovering. Not recovering, but I know throughout the offseason he had an injury that happened in the spring, so he's been recovering. But he's been playing, so I don't know what happened to Caden Bennett. He didn't play in this game. Carson Conklin, I think he's a sophomore now. I think he should be a sophomore. He's a freshman. Did he redshirt last year? It says he's a freshman. I think he's a sophomore. ESPN says he's a freshman. 22 of 32, 264 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Elijah Tolliver had 21 carries, 111 yards, and a touchdown. And then they had the receiver, Danny Scudero, 4 receptions, 102 yards, and a touchdown. Sac State, they're 1-2 right now. They lost two FBS games to Fresno State and San Jose State. So, not a good judgment of how good they are, but then they play FBS competition in Nicholls, and they absolutely beat up on them. So, Sacramento State could be a very good squad. They have Texas A&M Commerce, who played UC Davis last week. Sac State has them next week. I'll be interested to see what they do against them. Sac State, I think, is going to be a good team. The Big Sky Conference is kind of up in the air. Montana State's really looking like the runaway favorite in the Big Sky Conference right now. Every other team that I've seen in the Big Sky Conference has their issues. Has their issues here and there. I think once Big Sky play starts, I think teams and where they stand will really start shaping up, and we'll really start getting some answers on where these teams stand, how good they are, how good they're going to be, what is their defenses like, what is their offensives like. But so far, when all these teams have played, lackluster FCS competition and 2 FBS games at most, it's hard to tell. But Montana State is looking like the best right now. Personally, that's what I think. That's where I think they stand currently. But you guys let me know what you thought about that Sac State game. They had a linebacker who played pretty well in that game. Their linebacker, Will Liotta, had 10 tackles, 5 solo, 2 sacks, and 3 tackles for loss. So had a pretty good game. But how good is Nicholls? They're 0-3 now. That doesn't look great, but we'll see how they do when they get into that Southland Conference play. You guys let me know what you thought about that Sac State game, and I will move on. Okay, the last game I'm going to be reacting to is the Albany versus Idaho game. Idaho absolutely beat up on Albany 41-13, getting their get back against Albany. Albany beat them in that close, very exciting playoff matchup in the quarterfinals that sent Albany to the semifinals against South Dakota State, which they ended up getting. They got shut out in that game. South Dakota State put up like 50 in that game, and Albany did not even put up a point. But Jack Wagner was 10 of 20, 156 yards, 2 touchdowns. Offensively, I don't know. Idaho's not the greatest offensive team currently. Their quarterback threw 2 touchdown passes to Jordan Dwyer, who's like their number 1 receiver this year. Nate Thomas had 2 rushing touchdowns. So from that standpoint, they did pretty well. But, they had a pick 6 as well from Tommy McCormick, so that's another touchdown. But, I don't know, they didn't kick any field goals. I don't know. It's so hard to judge this Idaho team. They beat Wyoming. They didn't look great offensively. I think their quarterback, Jack Wagner, has looked good, but offensively, they haven't looked super explosive offensively. They get the job done. Don't let me detract from that. They get the job done offensively, but I don't know if anybody in the Big Sky Conference, Idaho included, has looked super explosive offensively, but they're able to move the ball. They're able to get the ball in the end zone. I mean, 41-13 is nothing to sneeze at. They definitely beat up on Albany. Albany threw for almost 290 passing yards, though. Their quarterback was 23-38, 290 yards, 1 TD. Their leading receiver had 114 yards. So from that standpoint, they kind of aired the ball out on Idaho, but Idaho's defensive line is absolutely, they get to the quarterback. I think I had the stats pulled up a minute ago, but they had quite a few sacks on that defense. Guys getting to the quarterback, guys able to affect the game. Idaho moves to 2-1. They've looked really good so far this year. They played Oregon close. Oregon has slid down in the standings every week. They just played Oregon State. They beat up on Oregon State, but they played Wyoming tough, and they beat Wyoming. And Wyoming lost to BYU yesterday pretty badly. So I don't know what to think about Wyoming, but I know Idaho is a good team. I know they have a really good defense. They've been keeping teams down on the scoring totals each week. So they're a team to watch for. They're the number 2 team in the Big Sky Conference to me right now. They got the number 1 defense in the Big Sky Conference to me right now. Statistically, it's probably Montana State. Maybe. I don't know. I'd have to look at the numbers on that. I definitely want to look at the numbers on that. So don't quote me on any of that. I'm not going to say that. But to me, I think Idaho probably has the best defense from the eye test. I think Idaho probably has the best defense in the Big Sky Conference. Their quarterback, Jack Wagner, played decent, completed 50% of his passes. But, I think they're going to get tested here in a few weeks as well. They play Abilene Christian next week, so not a great test for them, but UC Davis on the 28th of September. That's going to be a really good date. A lot of people should pay attention to that game. That's a game I'm going to be paying attention to. After going through some of these games, reacting to some of these games, I'm looking at some of the matchups that some of these teams have, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be a very exciting week in the Big Sky Conference, so it might be a snoozer this week. A lot of teams might get beat up on this week, but that's something to pay attention to this week. What did you guys think about this Idaho game? Did you guys think they looked, obviously they looked good. You're crazy if you walked away from that Idaho game and didn't think they looked good. They look great defensively. They're getting to the quarterback at a high rate. Keyshawn James Newby, this dude, I think, has 6 sacks on the season now. He had 5 after last week. 6 sacks. That's averaging 2 sacks a game in just 3 games. This guy is absolutely dominating FCS football this year. He's absolutely been a beast for that Idaho squad. He's going to be somebody to pay attention to as the season progresses on. I think he could be in the running he's my early pick for Big Sky Defensive Player of the Year. That's voted on by the coaches, but if I had a pick, he'd be a guy that I'd be on the lookout for getting Big Sky Defensive Player of the Year. Obviously, they still have to play the Big Sky schedule, so that's really where they're going to get tested at. But if anybody was in the running for Big Sky Defensive Player of the Year, it would definitely be Keyshawn James Newby on that Idaho squad. But they have a great defensive line in totality. Their defensive line is really good. Albany only rushed for 60 yards against them. So, if we look at some of the rushing totals that they've been giving up this season, teams have not been rushing for a lot of yardage on this Idaho squad. You look at Wyoming rushed for 144, so nothing crazy there. That was just a back and forth game in that one. And then let's look at Oregon. How many rushing yards did Oregon have? Oregon only had 107 rushing yards against them. They had a 95-yard rusher. So, decent. If you looked at the averages, I'm sure it averages around like 100 rushing yards per game. Maybe a little bit over 100. But, Idaho's been very good. I think they're going to be very good. They're one of the better teams in the Big Sky Conference. They could make a push in the playoffs, given how that defense plays. I think offensively, you would love to see a little bit higher of an output from that offense. But defensively, they look good. You guys let me know what you think about that in the comments, and we will move on. Okay. So before I talk about my top performances, I want to talk about my Big Sky poll after week 3. Now, there was a little movement being had in the poll. I did take a step back and move a team up who I moved down from last week. But at number 1, I have Montana State. They've looked like the best. I've said that continuously. At number 2, I have Idaho. They've looked the best defensively. I think they're the second best team in the Big Sky Conference. At number 3, I have Montana. They've looked really, really good at times. They looked good against Morehead State. I don't think Montana has looked very great, but, until they get a defense, like North Dakota, I think is one of the top 5 to 10 teams in the country. So until they lose definitively to somebody, and they lost a really close game against a good North Dakota squad. So, from that standpoint, I think it's hard to really move them down super far without them, completely getting dominated by somebody, which hasn't happened. They've had some problems, and obviously, that looks bad from certain standpoint, but they're still 2-1 right now, with a 50-point dub against a Division I squad. So at number 4, I have UC Davis. UC Davis has looked like the top 5 team in the Big Sky Conference. I think they've looked very good. I'm very interested to see what that UC Davis squad is going to be able to do this year. They just beat Southern Utah, who I think is going to be a pretty good team in that United Athletic Conference. That United Athletic Conference might end up being better than I initially thought. They might be able to get 2 teams in the playoffs. I mean, Central Arkansas is in that United Athletic Conference. I think they are. Don't make me lie. I'm going to go look at it right now. We'll look at this United Athletic Conference. And the United Athletic Conference, they got ACU, who's 2-1. They have Central Arkansas, who's 2-1. They also have Tarleton, who's 2-1. And then they have Southern Utah, who's 1-2. But Southern Utah could end up being a pretty good squad. So the United Athletic Conference could end up being a pretty decent conference this year. And so UC Davis, that's a pretty good win for them. Depending on how Southern Utah's season ends, that could end up being a really great win for UC Davis. But UC Davis at 4, Sac State at 5. They played 2 FBS opponents. They played Nicholls, who won the Southland last year, but was a quick out in the playoffs. So decent for them, but they're 5. At 6, I have NAU. At 7, I have Weber State. At 8, I have Eastern Washington. They've been sliding. They lost back-to-back games. They lost one against Sela this week in a 28-24 battle. I didn't even talk about that game, but, offensively, they have not looked amazing, and defensively, they have not looked great at all. They're 1-2, so Eastern Washington's going to have to show me something. I was pretty high on Eastern Washington to start the season, but until I see something different, I was high on their quarterback. I still think their quarterback's a good player, but as a squad, they're going to have to show me something different for me to start, giving them the respect that I think they would want, and, I don't know. They have to show me something. But Eastern Washington at 8, Northern Colorado at 9, not at the bottom of the bracket. Northern Colorado, they took ACU to the wire. ACU is 2-1 currently. ACU lost to Texas Tech by 1. Let me read that. ACU lost to Texas Tech by 1. And then they beat West Georgia, and then they just beat Northern Colorado, who, I don't know what people think about Northern Colorado. They're not the best squad, but ACU plays Idaho this week, so that might be a game to watch this week. Idaho against ACU, Abilene Christian, that is, if you guys don't know what ACU is. That game will be played in Abilene, Texas. So Idaho on the road, ACU at home. What kind of crowd does ACU have? That could be a pretty good game. We'll talk about that at the end, though. At number 9, you got Northern Colorado. At 10, you got Idaho State, who is currently Idaho State's 1-2. They just lost to North Dakota in a beatdown. They beat Western Oregon and they lost to Oregon State. So we'll see what they do against Southern Utah next week. That could be a pretty decent game as well. Southern Utah should win that game. You got Cal Poly at 11 and Portland State at 12. Cal Poly has not looked great this year in the Big Sky Conference. They beat Western Oregon just now, but they've lost 2. They lost 2 before they lost to Stanford and they lost to San Diego. So, say what you want about the Pioneer Football League. Montana got the first dub against the Pioneer Football League this weekend against Morehead State. Prior to that, Cal Poly had lost to San Diego, and Eastern Washington had lost to Drake. Drake, if you don't know, is the reigning champion in the Pioneer League. They went undefeated in the Pioneer League last year, 8-0. They had the Pioneer League Defensive Player of the Year on their team. So, say what you want about the Pioneer League. They've been beating up on the Big Sky this year, so it is what it is. But those are my rankings for the Big Sky this week. Obviously, this is fluid. It'll change bi-weekly. Obviously, there's some different teams in it this week. There's some changes this week already from last week. But like I said, 1, I had Montana State. 2, I had Idaho. 3, I had Montana. 4, I have UC Davis. 5, I have Sac State. 6, I have NAU. 7, I have Weber State. 8, I have Eastern Washington. 9, I have Northern Colorado. 10, I have Idaho State. 11, I have Cal Poly, and 12, I have Portland State. You guys let me know what you think about these rankings down below, and I will move on.
Treasure State University of Montana football is a way of life. Lithia Ford has long been a proud sponsor of Grizz football, and Lithia Ford of Missoula is thrilled to have several of the best Montana football seniors driving the best trucks in Montana. Aspen Sound is the premier car audio and accessory shop in Montana. Aspen Sound makes sure the boys are riding in style with tinted windows and state-of-the-art stereo systems. There's always a party in Montana. Whether you're going to a concert, a wedding, or a football game, the Montana Party Bus will get you there. Skyline Sports and ESPN MT cover the Big Sky with more depth than anyone. Check out SkylineSportsMT.com and tune in to Nuanez Now on 1029 ESPN Missoula every day. My Montana Roots and Wear Your Roots clothing is your go-to spot for the most unique and comfortable lifestyle clothing you'll find anywhere. And get your custom t-shirts to support your favorite player. From 5 local businesses who love Montana, best of luck to the Grizz as they pursue another Big Sky Conference championship.
Okay. My top Big Sky performances of week 3. Now, there weren't a ton of great performances in the Big Sky. I tried to look at most of the defensive performances. I tried to look at most of the offensive performances. There were some decent offensive performances, but we haven't had that one offensive game this year. I mean, Efton Chisholm going for 173 receiving yards is good, but in terms of like just wow, and this might be a bigger league issue, like maybe there's just no necessarily wow players like that in the Big Sky this year. Maybe the talent level in the Big Sky is falling. You know, I don't know. I'm not necessarily going to say that, but you know, I haven't seen like a performance necessarily that is just like blown me away this year yet. I'm waiting to see a game like that, like 300, 400 passing yards from a quarterback, 200 receiving yards from a receiver. A guy gets, I mean, I guess Keyshawn James Newby getting 3 sacks in a game. That's pretty awesome. You know, he got 3 sacks against Wyoming last week. That was a pretty good game. I honestly think he could have got 4. I think he honestly had a half on one of them that they didn't give him. But not the number one performance, but one of the top performances that I noticed is Malai Fanati at Morehead State. Like I mentioned earlier, say what you want. Say he played against a non-scholarships team. Say he played against a team that, you know, is not very good. Yada, yada, yada. Say what you want about this guy or what his performance was against the team. 24 carries, 176 yards, 1 touchdown, average 7 yards a carry. As a freshman, a true freshman, his first D1 time playing in the game, he balled out. He absolutely balled out. So props to him. He showed out and showed up. I hear that, you know, the Grizz are still trying to hold his red shirt, so we probably won't see him that much this year, but he had a really good game when he got the opportunity to show up. Next, you have Lan Larison, the running back at UC Davis. He had 180 all-purpose yards, 15 carries, 88 yards, 5.9 yards per carry on the ground, no rushing touchdowns. He had 7 receptions, 92 yards receiving, 1 touchdown, 13.1 yards per reception. He had a really good game. UC Davis, if they want to win, they need Lan Larison to have games like this every week. He's going to have to affect the game on the ground. He's going to have to affect the game in the receiving game, and he might even have to affect the game in the return game. I don't know if they have him returning this year, but I know he has that ability. But Lan Larison is going to have to carry this UC Davis squad if they want to be something. You look at last year, he went down. They weren't that great. He came back. He started making plays, and, you know, they were able to do something when he got back on the field. So Lan Larison, great player, one of the best players in the Big Sky Conference offensively, and he showed that this week against Southern Utah when they needed it, and they were able to get the dub because of it. Hayden Harris, defensive end at Montana, 3 tackles, 2 sacks, 1 interception, 1 forced fumble. Hayden Harris is up to 4.5 sacks on the season. He has been absolutely balling this year. He was kind of quiet against North Dakota last week. A lot of the defense was quiet last week against North Dakota, but this week, Hayden Harris completely showed up. He's getting to the quarterback at a high rate. I think he could be another player, along with Keyshawn James Newby, who could be up for Defensive Player of the Year. It's interesting that, you know, you got Keyshawn James Newby, Hayden Harris, guys who weren't really very known last year in terms of in the running for Defensive Player of the Year, who are starting off their 2024 campaigns really strong. And then you look at somebody like Brody Grebe, who probably would have been a lot of people's preseason favorite for potentially Big Sky Defensive Player of the Year. I think he has 1 sack on the season. So, you know, it's just interesting to look at it and see where things currently stand when you might not, I mean, obviously, when the games are being played, when the season starts, it's always going to look different than you thought it was. But I don't know if anybody would have had a Hayden Harris or Keyshawn James Newby on their bingo card of potential Big Sky Defensive Player of the Year candidates. But they're off to a really good start. Obviously, we're only 3 games into the season. There's a lot of football to be played. So much can happen in these next 8 weeks. So we will see what these guys are able to do. But Hayden Harris is another player from Montana who had played really well this weekend against Morehead State. Next on the list, you have Darvin Hubbard, the running back from Northern Arizona. He had 14 carries, 130 yards, 1 touchdown, 9.3 yards per carry. He had 2 receptions, 23 yards. That's about maybe a little under 12 yards a carry, 12 yards of reception. They played against Utah Tech. They beat up on Utah Tech. It wasn't that close of a game. They beat Utah Tech. Sorry, I have it right here. Trying to pull it up. They beat Utah Tech pretty handedly. They beat them. Where am I looking at? They beat them 45-17, so it wasn't that close of a game. But Darvin Hubbard had a really good game. Like I said, I'm trying to find some of these top performances offensively, defensively, and there's nothing really that's like standing out to me, man. Like, please do leave me a comment down below if you think I'm missing somebody. But, I feel like I'm doing pretty decent research offensively. I'm looking at these teams' stats, the official stats from their team websites, not from ESPN, because ESPN doesn't really do FCS stats like that. But I'm going to their websites, looking at their stats, and nothing super staggering is standing out to me. But you guys let me know if I missed something, and I will be sure to, tap in next time. But Darvin Hubbard, running back in Northern Arizona, he had a really good game, pretty good game to help Northern Arizona get that W against Utah Tech. The last top performance from week 3 is Sac State linebacker Will Leota. Please let me know if I'm pronouncing his name wrong. He had 10 tackles, 5 of them solo, 2 sacks, and 3 tackles for loss. Sac State was able to get the victory against Nicholls 34-7. Will Leota was a big piece of that. He absolutely balled out, flying around, 10 total tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. He's getting to the quarterback. He's also getting in the backfield, getting those tackles for loss. He had a great game. Sac State is a good team in the Big Sky Conference. I'm interested to see what they're able to do this year. Really interested to see what they're able to do this year. But you guys let me know what you think about those top performances. You let me know if you think I missed somebody. But if not, I will move on. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the week 4 matchups in the Big Sky Conference, and I'm going to preview the week 4 matchups in the Big Sky Conference. First, you have Eastern Washington at Nevada. Based on what we've seen from Eastern Washington in the last couple of weeks, Nevada should win that game. Eastern Washington has looked decent offensively, but defensively, they can't stop a cold. They can't get off the field. They haven't been able to stop anybody. So Eastern Washington at Nevada, that should be handled pretty solidly by Nevada. Gotta guess that game is being played in Reno, Nevada. The one interesting thing about that game at Nevada is Jeff Choate, who used to coach at Montana State, is now at Nevada after having a short stint at Texas. So that's a reason to potentially tap into that game, see how Jeff Choate plays after returning to the Big Sky to play a Big Sky, when returning to the Big Sky to play a Big Sky team. Nevada is not a great squad. They beat Troy 28-26. They lost to Georgia Southern 20-17. They lost to Minnesota 27-0 yesterday, and then SMU beat them 29-24. And SMU is currently, where is SMU currently sitting at? SMU is currently 2-1. So they lost to BYU, but they beat Houston Christian and they beat Nevada. So, Nevada's not that great right now, but they could gain some confidence beating Eastern Washington. Eastern Washington currently on ESPN has a 19% chance to win that game according to ESPN Analytics. So we will see how they do. I think Efton Chisholm and Kekoa Visperis will have to have amazing games in order for them to win that game, but that's going to be an interesting matchup for anybody that taps into that. Next, we have Western Carolina versus Montana. Montana currently 2-1. That one loss coming to from North Dakota. Western Carolina currently is 1-2. They actually played a very, very closely contested game against Campbell, but they also played a pretty closely contested game until the end against NC State. NC State ended up running away from that. But that Campbell game is one that really confuses me. Campbell's 1-2. Campbell just lost to Rhode Island after beating Western Carolina. I mean, any given Saturday, anybody can lose. But for Western Carolina to lose that game against Campbell and for Cole Gonzalez to throw 3 interceptions is absolutely unacceptable. But yesterday against Cole Gonzalez was 23 for 36, 254 yards, no touchdowns. He had 14 rushes for 14 yards. Got to believe some sacks probably played into that. But they played a pretty good game. They spread the ball around, 254 passing yards. But it was really probably defensively where they really stood up. Elon had an 100-yard rusher, but outside of that, I mean, their quarterback threw for 285 yards too. So very interesting from that standpoint. They beat an Elon team who was ranked, who probably will still be ranked, because Elon beat North Carolina Central, but lost to Duke, and now they lost to Western Carolina. So, Western Carolina, this is going to be a good game. Western Carolina is 1-2, but they're a good squad. They have a really good quarterback. Their quarterback hasn't really been this year who I thought he was going to be. He hasn't been this year who he was billed up to be this season. He has 4 interceptions on the season. All 4 of those interceptions came against Campbell, so he hasn't played the greatest. Montana, really, I think, should win this game, but this is definitely going to be a good game. This is the game that I mentioned in the offseason. North Dakota was one of those good dates that I mentioned, and Western Carolina was the other team that I mentioned that Montana might struggle with, it might be a good game. Every team comes into Washington Grizzly Stadium. They want to win. They want to beat the Grizz at their home stadium, so it's going to be a good game. Played in Missoula, Montana at 1 p.m. on Saturday. ESPN will be covering that game, I'm sure. Script Sports and MTM are going to be covering that game as well, but that's going to be a really good game. Should be a really good game. Should be a tightly contested game. If Western Carolina is who they think they are, they should come in here with a lot of intensity, wanting to knock off the Grizzlies. The Grizz are top 10 still. They were 8 this week, which is very interesting. The Grizz were ranked higher than North Dakota, which I thought they would at least be ranked lower than North Dakota. But, I guess the voters have a lot of respect for Montana, so it's interesting. Mercyhurst against Montana State. That game is being played at 1 p.m. on Saturday in Bozeman, Montana. Montana State, I mentioned their Montana. I think they look good. If you've heard me talk all year, I think Montana's the best team in the Big Sky Conference. But I also did mention in the offseason, Montana State had a cupcake off non-conference schedule outside of New Mexico. And if you really look back at that New Mexico game, that game shouldn't have been that close either. They were a 14-point favorite going in that game for a reason. That game, they had 2 defensive touchdowns. They gave up 2 defensive touchdowns. That never should have been the case. Montana State should have won that game by at least 2 scores, maybe more. But it was a tightly contested game. They came back at the end. Tommy Mellott put together a beautiful 2-minute drive to lead them down the field and score with 10 seconds left on the clock. So kudos to them. But then you play Utah Tech, beat them by 24. Then you play Maine, you beat them by close to 20. So Mercyhurst is going to be another case of that. Mercyhurst is currently 1-2. They lost to Robert Morris. They lost by 1 to Howard, and they beat a school called Wheeling. Have no idea who they are, but Montana State should handle Mercyhurst. It should not be a close game, but go tap into that game. It's at 1 p.m. It'll be on ESPN Plus. Should be a pretty good game. Southern Utah at Idaho State. I would pick Southern Utah to win that game. Southern Utah was in the Big Sky Conference not too long ago. They've currently transitioned and now are in the United Athletic Conference, but both teams are 1-2. Could be a pretty tight game, but if I had to put my money on it, I would say Idaho State should win that game. That game is going to be played in Pocatello, Idaho at 4 p.m. on Saturday on ESPN Plus. Go tap into that. Next, you have Northern Arizona and Incarnate Word. Northern Arizona is 2-1. If Northern Arizona is who they think they are and who I think they could be, I think Northern Arizona should win this game. Northern Arizona should win this game. Incarnate Word is 1-2. They played South Dakota State pretty tightly until the end. They lost by 21. They played Southern Illinois pretty tightly. They lost by 7. And then Northern Colorado, they beat Northern Colorado by 3 scores, so beat them by 21. Northern Arizona should win this game. Northern Arizona should definitely win this game. They're 2-1. They've only beat Utah Tech. They played a school called Lincoln, who's an independent. And then they played Arizona very tightly. Arizona, after seeing what they've done these last couple of weeks, is not a very good squad. But, I think it says something for Northern Arizona to play them pretty tightly. So that game will be played in Texas, San Antonio, Texas, to be exact, at 5 p.m., on Saturday on ESPN Plus. Go tap into that game if you're interested in seeing Northern Arizona. That could be, I'm not going to say that. Next, you have Sacramento State against Texas A&M Commerce, who is 0-3. Sac State is 1-2. Obviously, those 2 losses coming to FBS opponents. That game is going to be played in Texas. Where do they play at? Commerce, Texas. Texas A&M Commerce. Duh. I didn't know that. I'm sorry. Texas A&M Commerce. That game is going to be played on Saturday at 5 p.m. in Commerce, Texas. Sacramento State should win this game. How much by? Who knows? I think how much they beat them by might dictate how good they are comparatively to UC Davis. UC Davis beat them by 14. If Sac State wants to show that they're on the same level as UC Davis, they should beat them by maybe around the same numbers. Maybe, I don't know. College football, it changes every week, so you can never say one way or the other. But Sac State is on the road for that game. They should win that game. We'll see what they do with the quarterback situation, Conklin, or do they play Bennett? Conklin's currently their leading passer with 528 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, 1 interception. He obviously is a good player. He's looked good this year. He seems to be kind of taking over that position as the number 1 quarterback over Caden Bennett. They kind of seemed like they were trying to wean him into that spot last year, but the quarterback for Texas A&M Commerce has thrown for 621 yards this year, but he's thrown 3 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. So not taking care of the ball at a high level, but we'll see what they're able to do. That game is going to be played at 5 in Texas. Commerce, Texas. Go tap into that one if you want. Weber State at Northwestern State. Northwestern State is 0-3. They've lost to South Alabama. Oh, yeah, they just lost Thursday night to South Alabama by 77. So get this. Northwestern was losing so bad that this has been talked about all over college football. I don't know if this is actually true, but they said the South Alabama people asked Northwestern if they wanted to play shorter quarters, or I think they asked them if they wanted to play shortened quarters, and Northwestern turned them down. But they lost 87-10, which is absolutely embarrassing. I don't know how you lose that bad. They lost to Prairie View A&M, which is an HBCU. And then, they lost to Tulsa by, 34. They lost to Tulsa by 34. They lost to Prairie View A&M by 6, and they lost by 77 to Northwestern. So Prairie View A&M probably isn't as good as Weber State. So Weber State should probably win that game beat Northwestern by 30-40. I don't see any betting lines right now. That game is going to be played in Louisiana. But Northwestern kind of went through some stuff last year. So, they might be still recovering from what happened last year. There was a shooting at one of their games. Really tough situation. I think somebody might have passed away in that situation as well. You guys can go do your research on that. But that game is going to be played at 5 in Louisiana on ESPN Plus on Saturday. Next to the Montana game, Montana versus Western Carolina, this is probably my game of the week. Idaho versus Abilene Christian. So if you want a game to tap into Montana versus Western Carolina. That's the number 1 game of the week in the Big Sky Conference for sure. The next best game is probably going to be Idaho versus Abilene Christian. I think if Idaho really beats up on them, that gives us some because I think Abilene Christian is a pretty good squad. Abilene Christian, like I mentioned earlier, has played. They played Texas Tech and lost to Texas Tech by 1. They beat West Georgia, and then they beat Northern Colorado. And I don't know what you think about Northern Colorado, but Idaho is obviously a really good team. Abilene Christian has looked decent this year. Their quarterback has thrown for 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns on the season. What? Are you serious? What? How many yards did he throw for against Texas Tech? Texas Tech is terrible. This man threw for 500 yards against Texas Tech. This Abilene quarterback is absolutely throwing the ball all over the place. This is crazy. Who is their quarterback? Maverick McIver. Either way, Idaho versus Abilene Christian. That's going to be a really good game. Their quarterback has thrown for 1,000 yards this season, 7 touchdowns, no interceptions. So I think that's somebody that could really test. This offense could really test this Idaho defense. This is what Idaho needs. Idaho needs a test defensively against a team that can really spread the ball around. This is going to be a good game. Tap in. This game is going to be played in Abilene, Texas on Saturday at 6 p.m. on ESPN+. Both teams are 2-1. Those losses coming to FBS opponents. Idaho's to Oregon, Abilene Christians to Texas Tech by 1. So could be a really good game. Tap in. Don't miss that one. Northern Colorado at Stephen F. Austin. Stephen F. Austin starting quarterback Sam Vidlak has thrown for 710 yards this season, 9 touchdowns on 2 interceptions. He's coming back to play a Big Sky Conference team. They play in Nacogdoches, Texas, Texas at Stephen F. Austin. That should be a decent game. I would honestly pick Stephen F. Austin to win that. Stephen F. Austin just lost a nail biter to McNeese. That game, obviously, Clifton McDowell at McNeese. Stephen F. Austin has Sam Vidlak, 2 former Grizz quarterbacks, both transferred in the offseason, ended up playing against each other game 3 in the season. Clifton McDowell led a game-winning drive. I had not watched that game back. I watched the last drive where they threw the interception to end the comeback attempt by Stephen F. Austin, but Clifton McDowell, I guess, led a game-winning drive against Stephen F. Austin. I guess it was a great game. Clifton McDowell is a winner, man. I mentioned this last year, and I'll mention it again. Clifton McDowell knows how to win. I think he's gonna their team is going to be around. McNeese is going to be around this year. They're 2-2 right now. They beat Stephen F. Austin. They lost to Texas A&M. They beat Southern, and they lost a close one to Tarleton. Tarleton is also a good squad. Tarleton currently is sitting at 2-1. Their one loss coming to Baylor. So, man, a United Athletic Conference is looking good. The Southland Conference is looking decent. We will see how decent once the season gets going. But there seems to be a little bit more parity in FCS football this year, just based on some of the scores I'm seeing, based on some of the outcomes I'm seeing. But Stephen F. Austin, Northern Colorado, I would pick Stephen F. Austin to win that game this week. Next, you got Portland State at Boise State. Boise is 1-1. They had a bye week, I guess, this past week. They played Oregon and almost beat Oregon. They lost by 3, and then they beat Georgia Southern. Their running back, Jonty, has rushed for almost 500 rushing yards this year, 459 rushing yards, 9 touchdowns on 45 carries. I don't even know what that average breaks out to be, 10 yards a carry. I mean, this dude, he's balling. He's balling. Portland State, it's probably going to get beat by 40-50 against Boise State. But, Portland State's not that great. They just had to cancel a game against South Dakota because of whooping cough. We'll see. Even if they play that game, I don't know how long the diagnosis for whooping cough, how long people are going to be out for that game. But if they do play that game, I suspect that, Boise State should win by 30 or 40. That game is going to be played at 7:45 on FS1 on Saturday in Boise, Idaho. So go tap into that if you want. The last and final game in the Big Sky Conference is UC Davis at Utah Tech. Utah Tech is 0-3. I think they've only played Big Sky teams this year currently. They played Northern Arizona, they played UNLV, and then they played Montana State. So they're playing a lot of Big Sky opponents in their non-conference schedule. 3 out of their 4 non-conference games are being played against Big Sky opponents, and they're currently 0-3 in those. So, Miles Hastings is thrown for 800 yards this year, 5 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Not great from that standpoint. Land Larson has rushed for 273 yards, 1 touchdown on 60 carries. That's going to be a really good game. Not a really good game. UC Davis should handle them very easily. That should be probably a blowout, probably by 40, at the very least 30. But that game is going to be played at 8 p.m. Big Sky After Dark in Davis, California, on ESPN Plus on Saturday. Tap into that game. That is the final game. But my 2 games for you to go watch. This week are Western Carolina versus Montana and Idaho at Abilene Christian. Those are going to be 2 really good games. I think that Idaho and Abilene Christian game could give us a lot of answers about Abilene Christian, but we cover the Big Sky, so Idaho, depending on how they do against a really high octane offense, I think that could give us a lot of answers. But Western Carolina, Montana, that's the number 1 game being played in the Big Sky Conference. Western Carolina is 1-2, but don't get tricked by that 1-2. They're a good squad. They got a great quarterback, and Montana has struggled on some fronts defensively and offensively, so they need to get some things shored up. And that's going to tell us if they have those things shored up or not. I'm trying to look around. Northern Arizona Incarnate Word could be another potential one for you to maybe keep your eye on. But Montana, Western Carolina, and Idaho, Abilene Christian, go tap into those games. You guys let me know if there's any other games that you guys think should be paid attention to by me or anybody else watching this channel. If not, I will move on.
Five Valleys Restoration, we follow a very strict process of how we do people's individual contents. It starts on site after our team walks in, evaluated everything, and we start separating out what can be salvaged, what can't be salvaged. Once we determine what can be salvaged, we have to determine the processes that we want to use. We get everything back to our content cleaning facility. There is one of the processes we use that's a ultrasonic cleaning system called a fire line. It's an assembly line system where we unbox, we open the box, we see what's in it, we go through the inventory of it, we open it up. It then goes through a pre-wash system. It then goes through the ultrasonic system. It goes through a post-wash system, and then it goes through a drying system, comes back around on the assembly line, and is reboxed into a clean box, re-inventory to make sure everything that was in there when it started is there when it comes through the system, reboxed and ready to go back into storage until it can go back into the homeowner's facility.
Five Valleys Restoration. Respond, restore, rebuild.
Okay, so obviously you guys all have seen the Mountain West, the teams that are merging into the Mountain West Conference. I don't even have the teams that are going into the Mountain West Conference right in front of me, but there's been some movement in college football. The Mountain West is getting lighter. The Pac-12 is being rebuilt with Mountain West teams. I heard rumbles that there could potentially be some more teams, but the teams I heard that are Oregon State, Washington are targeting Boise, San Diego State, Fresno, and Colorado State. Those four teams are already going to the Big Sky or to the Pac-12, so that is confirmed. But the Athletic ranks teams who it thinks should be top Mountain West Conference targets. And I think this was posted by Sam Herder. The Athletic ranks teams who it thinks should be top Mountain West Conference targets. At number one, that top target in the Mountain West Conference was North Dakota State. Obviously, a lot of people mention year in and year out how North Dakota State should move up to the FBS, how they should play in the Mountain West, maybe the MAC. I think they dominate the MAC. The Conference USA, they dominate Conference USA. The Sun Belt, they dominate the Sun Belt. I think North Dakota State could potentially one day be a Big Ten team. Financially, it doesn't make sense for them to be a Big Ten team, but, competitively wise, it would help them recruiting. They win championships at the FCS level. But that's the thing, is like they win championships at the FCS level. Why move up when you dominate the FCS level? NDSU is the number one target. Will that work out? If you go follow Sam Herder and Mike McFeely, Skyline Sports is another good publication that talks about some of the ins and outs of FCS to FBS transition. Not only is the fee now $5 million to move up to the FBS, but there's also some intricacies with, scholarship amount, Title IX, so you have to have 16 sports. So a lot of the schools would have to add sports. Title IX becomes an issue with that. Money also becomes an issue. Like there's so many things outside of just competitively what moving up looks like. But NDSU was the number one target on that athletic list. South Dakota State was number two on that list. At 3A and 3B is Montana and Montana State. At number 5 was UTEP. At number 6 was New Mexico State. At number 7 was Idaho. And at number 8 was Sac State. Financially, Sac State could do it. They're one of the higher subsidized teams in the Big Sky Conference. They don't struggle financially like some of the other schools do because of their athletic fees. Montana, Montana State, and South Dakota State, and North Dakota State are some of the lowest subsidized teams in the FCS. They sit around like 40%, 35-40% for all of those teams, and that's a problem. James Madison, on the other hand, sits at around like 80%. These are things that Sam Herder talks about all the time. I don't know all the official numbers, but if you want more in-depth info about that, go talk to him. But I think it'd be great if Montana, Montana State, South Dakota State, and North Dakota State all moved up to the Mountain West Conference. That would mean some really good football being played year in and year out between those teams. I think Wyoming could add to that as well. If Idaho was up there as well, you could bring that Idaho Montana rivalry back up with them. But Montana, Montana State, one's not going to move up without the other. They got to stay together. That rivalry is one of the most important things about Montana football, about Montana and Montana State. One doesn't go anywhere without the other. They're a package deal, and they've both been really great teams in the FCS subdivision the last couple of years, so they got to go together. But I think that could be potentially really good. NDSU obviously is going to be a high target for any conference who wants a really good football team to be very competitive, to maybe give their conference some pedigree. The Mountain West could really benefit from having NDSU. The MAC could definitely benefit from having NDSU. Conference USA and the Sun Belt could all, and even the AAC, American Athletic Conference, could benefit from having NDSU in their conference, as well as South Dakota State, as well as Montana State. The other thing you got to think about with all these schools is like they're small markets. They're big brand names in the FCS, but they're small markets in themselves. So they don't, like, in terms of TV deals, like Montana only has 1 million people in the state total. So how TV wise, with a TV deal, if you're trying to negotiate, Colter Nuanez talked about this last week. He thinks you have to do it regionally. So like it has to make sense regionally in terms of its TV deal in order to get dollars for the conference. In order to get dollars for a TV deal, it'd have to be regionalized, and you'd have to work with some brands like maybe a Town Pump, or I don't know what that looks like selling a TV deal. I've never done that, but it'd have to make sense regionally, because nationally it won't make a lot of sense because most of these states barely have a big population. They're big brand names in the FCS, but how do those brands translate to the G5, to the mountain, to that G5, specifically the Mountain West Conference? And then, like, how are you able to sell that, to go to brands and sell that to TV stations? Like, what is that going to look like sitting down at the table negotiating that? Who knows? But this is very interesting. There's a lot of changes going on in college football. Good changes, bad changes. You guys let me know what you think they are. But yeah, I think it'd be great if these teams moved up. Personally, I think it'd be cool if they moved up. A lot of people don't see the point in it. When you're dominant at the FCS, why not stay dominant at the FCS? I hear that, but also, times are changing. The FCS might not even be anything. If a lot of these teams keep moving up, the FCS is getting watered down and more watered down and more watered down with the transfer portal. These schools are losing so many recruits, with guys wanting to move up to FBS for various different reasons. But, the FCS is becoming watered down. If you look at the FCS this year, the competitiveness of the FCS this year is very weird. There's nothing really that stands out to you in terms of teams that are just like overly dominant. There's no talent necessarily that stands out and is just like in your face, like super drastic, because all of them go up to the FCS, go up to FBS, go up to the Power 5. But you guys let me know what you think about the Mountain West potentially adding some Big Sky or Missouri Valley Football Conference teams, and I will move on. Okay, that's going to conclude my video this week. I want to thank you guys for tapping in. Make sure you hit the subscribe button right now. Make sure you guys hit that like button. Make sure you guys leave me a comment down below. It's going to be a great week 4 in college football, specifically in the Big Sky Conference. Let me know in the comments what games you guys are watching this week, whether it's around the FCS, whether it's around college football, whether it's NFL football. It's Sunday right now, so there's a lot of NFL football. The Chiefs and the Bengals are about to play right now. That should be a really good game. But you guys let me know in the comments what you guys think about this. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button. Leave me a like, please. It helps the channel out a ton. I appreciate you guys continuing to tap into the channel. I will catch you guys next week. See ya later.